In lesson 6, we are going to continue our work with square binomials and circles to rewrite equations to find the center and the radius of a circle. So think back to lesson 5 and think about the patterns that you noticed when you multiplied out binomials and come up with the final term here that would make this into a perfect square binomial. So go ahead and try that and then come back. So if you remember when you were multiplying out binomials, you got two of these middle terms, okay? So two of the same exact term to get this inside term. So you had a 5x and a 5x. And then this was the number that you multiplied times itself. So 5 times 5 to get you this number, 25. So here we would have had a negative 8x and a negative 8x. Negative 8 times negative 8 for this final term gave us positive 64. Here we would have had 20x and 20x. 20 times 20 gave us 400. And then this one, not a nice number, not an integer here. But so you could have taken 5x and divided it by 2. So that if you're working with decimals, you got a 2.5x and a 2.5x. And then multiplied that together, 2.5 times 2.5, and got 6.25. Another way you could have done that was just leaving it as the fraction, 5 divided by 2x and 5 divided by 2x. So then we could have taken 5 divided by 2 and squared it to get this. So as a fraction, so 5 squared is 25 over 2 squared is 4. So this would also work in here. So if we just talked about how would we write these as the binomials that we were squaring out. So you got that middle term, okay, and that gave you the number. So this 20, positive 20 was our number that was inside of this binomial squared. Or in this case, this positive 2.5 or 5 halves. So we could have done this as x plus 2.5 squared, or as a fraction, x plus 5 halves squared. Where if we have a negative here, then it would have been x minus 8 squared to get us this trinomial. So let's practice a little bit finding the center and the radius of a circle. So if you notice, you kind of see what we did on the last screen. You see kind of two pieces here. So you'll see, whoops, that's a circle. So we see this kind of X part. If we look at this as a couple different parts. So we see this X part, and then you also see this Y part. So let's do what we did here and fill in the blank that would make this green part a perfect square trinomial and this blue part a perfect square trinomial. So thinking about what you did, so we took 18, divided it by 2. So we did 18 divided by 2, which was 9. And then we squared that to put it in the blank. So this blank would have been an 81. This blank here would have been negative 10 divided by 2, which is negative 5, squared, which is positive 25. So now the difference here is we've put an equation with it. We've put an equal sign. So we need to make sure once we've added something to one side of the equation, we add it to the other side to make sure it's balanced. So if we add 81 over here, we need to add it here. And if we add 25 on the left side, then we need to add 25 on the right side. So now what this allows us to do is rewrite these. So now we can factor these back to the binomials that they came from. And so what would the binomial inside of this one be? Was x plus 9. And the binomial that got us this perfect square trinomial would have been y minus 5. And then we can just combine all of these terms. So just do 63 plus 81 plus 25, and you get 169 over here. So what would the center of this circle be? So the center, now we can see, would be, what are we subtracting from x? So negative 9. And then what are we subtracting from y? And that's 5. So that gives us our center. And then the radius. So remember, this is r squared. So the square root of that would be 13 for our radius. So go ahead and try these next two following that process, and then come back. And this is not in your book. This is just practice. All right, so this one, to complete this perfect square trinomial here, divide negative 8 by 2 is negative 4. Squared is 16, so we'll add 16 to both sides. What would complete this one? We would do negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8. Squared is 64. So then to write it so that we can see the center of this circle, we'll factor these back into binomials. So inside of this first one, we would have had x minus 4 to get us here. This one, we would have had y minus 8. And then add these together. So you had negative 31 plus 16 plus 64. So you got 49. So our center here would be negative 4, and then 8. And then the radius would be, so this is r squared. So the radius is 7. This final one, so we would do negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1, squared is 1. So add 1 to both sides. 12 divided by 2 is 6, squared is 36. So add 36 to both sides. And then factor. So we end up with x minus 1. So negative 2 divided by 2 was that negative 1. And then y plus 6. So 12 divided by 2 was that 6. And then add these together. So 12 plus 1 plus 36 gives you 49. So we get a center of 1, negative 6. Okay, so 1, negative 6. And then our r squared is 49. So our r is 7. So that's how we can kind of rewrite or use the perfect square trinomials to help us get the center and the radius of a circle. So on page, on page 45 in your book, go ahead and look at what Elena did in her steps. So the goal is to determine the center and the radius like we just did. And she was given this problem to start. So go ahead and take a look at each step, writing down what you notice that Elena did. And then come back to the video for help. All right, so here are the steps in your workbook on page 45. So let's take a look at what Elena did in each step. So for step 1, so the difference is this negative 105. So she actually subtracted the 105 to the other side so that all she had was the variables on this side. And she put the like variables together. So she just rewrote with the x's next to each other. So said x squared minus 6x. Okay, just put those next to each other. Got the y's next to each other here. Okay, and then brought that 105 to the other side. So subtracted 105 to both sides. In step 2, she figured out what number she needed in order to complete this square, right? And added it to both sides. So in your book, it says, why did she add 9? Okay, so why did she add 9 on the left side and 100 on the left side? So where did those come from? She made perfect square trinomials. And then why did she do it on the right side? So why did she then also put the 9 and the 100 on the left side? Was to keep the equation balanced. Okay. And then just combined all of these, right? So then just simplified here to get to this 4. So what should her next step be? And so hopefully from the last screen, you remember, then we can go ahead and we can actually factor these perfect square trinomials. Okay, so we can factor this to a binomial squared. Okay, and that's going to be x and then minus 3, because we'll do this negative 6 divided by 2 and get that negative 3 there. And then we'll do it with the y part as well. Okay, so what did you get? What would you get here? So negative 20 divided by 2 gave us that negative 10. Squared was where that 100 came from, but factor that part. And then on this side, you can leave it as a 4. You can also write it as the radius squared. So what number squared gives us 4? So that would be 2 squared if you want to have it written out like that. So now coming up with the center. And so what's the center? So the center is x minus the x coordinate. So what did we subtract from the x? Was 3. And what did we subtract from the y? Was 10. Okay, so we have x minus 3, y minus 10. And then our radius is 2. So if we wanted to draw, you could just draw a quick sketch of this in your book, but we'd go to 310 would be the center. And then you can draw a radius of 2. So you're just sketching it. You don't have grids in your book, but you can just draw a sketch. And that would be the circle. So then at the bottom of page 48, why don't we write down some simplified steps on how we do what's called completing the square. So steps to rewriting into this form, okay, into this standard form. So when it's multiplied out, so when it's given to you like this, okay, when it's given to you all multiplied out, what are the steps to go backwards? So at the bottom of page 48 under your summary, and your summary says this just in a lot more words. So let's just simplify it a little bit. So step 1 was to rearrange the terms. Okay, getting the x's next to each other, the y's next to each other, and bringing all of the just constants over to the right side. Then you created perfect square trinomials, and then make sure you add those numbers to both sides. So remember, that was this step where you had to add to both sides. So whatever number, okay, you put in, you had to add to both sides. Then you rewrote those perfect square trinomials as the binomials. Okay, so as this. And then that allowed you to determine the center and the radius. Remembering that your center is that HK. And then the radius Squared is this number, so just make sure that if it's multiplied out, say this says 100, that you square root it to get what r is. Or if it's already written as 10 squared, then you can see that the radius is 10. All right, so go ahead and practice this. Try one more time on page 46 in your book. You've got a set of terms there to rewrite using those steps we just wrote down, and then come back to the video at any point if you are struggling. All right, so first step, okay, so first thing we said in our steps was to rearrange the terms. Okay, so let's get the x's by each other. And I'm just going to write the x's. I'll leave the x's in orange. So we've got x squared, and I've got a minus 2x. Okay, then I'm going to write the y's in blue. So I've already done this x squared and this negative 2x. Then I have a positive y squared, and I have a positive 4y. So now I've done those. And then we wanted to bring these constants over to the other side. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides to bring this 4 to the other side. So then I have this equal to 4. So now what you want to do is complete the square and get these into perfect square trinomials so that we can factor them. So we have x squared minus 2x and then plus what? And then we're going to do the same thing with the y part. So we have this positive y squared plus 4y plus what? And then remember, whatever we add to that side, we need to add to this side as well, okay, to keep the equation balanced. So we'll figure out by dividing this term by 2. So we'll do negative 2, and I'll just do it up here. But negative 2 divided by 2 equals negative 1. Squared gives me 1. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. Then we'll do the same thing for the y part. So now our middle term is 4. So we'll divide 4 by 2, which is 2. And then we'll square it to get 4. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. Then we'll go ahead and factor these. So the point was that you'd be able to factor this, okay, into a perfect square binomial. And we'll do that with the y part as well. So negative 2 divided by 2 was negative 1 for that middle term. 4 divided by 2 was positive 2 for this middle term. And then we'll combine these. 4 plus 1 is 5 plus 4 is 9. That allows us to get our center, okay, which is positive 1, negative 2, opposite of what it looks like in there. And then the radius, so this is our radius squared. So r squared is equal to 9. So our radius is 3. So then we could plot this circle by going to 1, negative 2, so plotting your center, and then doing a radius of 3. So I'm just going to count to the right 3, to the left 3, up 3, down 3. And then you can just sketch. Okay, so just draw as nice of a circle as you can. If you have a compass, you can certainly open your compass from the center of this circle by 3 and draw a nice circle around there too. All right, so then what did we find out? So we found out this was the equation that we started with. This is the one that we ended up with. Okay, so we know that these are equivalent equations representing the same circle. Okay, so these two equations are just written differently, but they're the exact same circle. They represent the same circle here. And then, so take a look at these two expressions. what makes them different from the ones we've already looked at. And then find the center and the radius of each to see if you understand the lesson. So in this one, what kind of makes this different is we only have this x squared term. We don't have any other terms here. So you don't really have anything to complete here because this already is kind of a perfect square. You could think of it as x minus 0. So we don't need to be adding anything with these x's. So for this one, if I just get rid of that, you would be subtracting the 143 to both sides. So you have the x squared, you have the y squared minus 24y, and then subtract 143 to both sides. So you get negative 143. So you only need to complete this part of the square. So we would do negative 24 divided by 2 gives us plus 144 that we would need to add to both sides. And then you're already ready to factor and get the radius. So then this would factor to y minus 12 squared. Add this together and you'd get 1. So with this one, your x coordinate of your center is just 0. We're not subtracting anything from the x. And then we're subtracting 12 from the y. So our center is 0, 12. R squared is 1. So r is 1. Then in this second one, it's already set up nicely for you to grab the center. Okay, so we've got a center of negative 35 and positive 50. So we don't need to complete the square. However, now we've got a radius, okay, so the radius squared is 19, so this just isn't a perfect square radius. So when we square root this, we're just going to get square root of 19. And so you can leave it like that, or you can write it as the decimal if you prefer. So then you could just do square root of 19 in your calculator and get a radius of 4.35 approximately, or 36, but either way. All right, then lesson summary here, and we already kind of wrote down the steps at the bottom of the summary. So this stuff that we're underlining is just the more wordy version of that, but you already wrote down the steps at the bottom. But so we can rewrite this equation in this form. Okay, so in the center radius form of a circle by rearranging the terms. Okay, so if you need more words of what that means, it says start by rearranging the terms in the equation to make it easier to work with. Group terms that include the same variable and move the negative 3 to the right side. Then we want the left side to include the 2 perfect squares. So we're going to figure out what goes in these boxes and be sure to add it to both sides. Then we'll end up writing those perfect square trinomials as binomials squared so that we can get the center. Then your cool down for this lesson that you can try to make sure that you understand the lesson is here. Be sure if you're having problems with this that you reach out to your teacher.